Hello, everybody. We'll get started here in a few. Good morning. Good morning. If anybody has any opens, please add them to the agenda. We'll get started here in a couple minutes. I think I've written more in these last 2 weeks than I've written in the last year.
But are you done?
Oh, it's never done.
No, it never is.
By successfully bringing things near completion, you get additional pain.
Yes, exactly.
Everybody, we'll give it till maybe 3 after the hour to get started. There is a copy of our agenda if you could sign in. If you have any items you'd like to add, any opens, please do so. We'll get started at 3 after the hour. Posted a link to the agenda.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. I don't expect we'll see the foundation folks today. They're all at an offsite in beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona. It's gray and rainy here in Columbus, Ohio.
Does that imply that you're unfettered? See, Rob, and
that's right. I'm off the chain today. Not gonna have David Wheeler
adult supervision.
You're going to tell us where your favorite working group, and you're really going to mean it this time.
Do. Actually, I get to stop in a new working group this week, which is exciting.
Oh, which one?
I'm going to go to Scorecards All-Star. They had asked for some additional collaboration, and since they're part of the Developer Best Practices group, I will poke my head in there, see if that becomes a thing. Luigi, do you have a question before we begin?
Yes, I am from another working group from the name is very long, from Identify Security Threat. And I would like to add a topic for today. It is possible. I hope it is a short topic, but I don't know. So
please, I posted a link to our agenda. Go ahead and put that in the open section. We would love to talk about that. I have a couple of business things to work on, and then we'll jump to the opens, and then hopefully we can work on our CBD guide. Very excited about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. All right, everybody. Today, May the 4th be with you all. This is the May 4th edition of the best working group within the OpenSSF, the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group. 2 points of order. Do we have anybody that would like to volunteer to be our scribe today to help us take notes?
I can help if someone will tag team.
Thank you. Awesome. Appreciate that, Vicki. Now, as tradition with this group, do we have any new friends Luigi would like to say hi and introduce themselves?
Yes. Hi, my name is Luigi. I am a security engineer, and I am contributing to OpenSSF from more or less 2 years. Usually I work in the security, in the Identify Security Threats Working Group. And in this period, we are working on Alpha project, the Alpha Omega project, and also on the Security Insight project. And I would like to present it to you because I am moving and jumping from different working group to present this project because it is important to be aligned, especially because there are a lot of communication risks. So I am here for this reason.
Awesome. So before we get to Luigi's presentation, do we have any other new friends that wanted to introduce themselves? All right, so a couple points of order before we jump into the presentation. I would ask everyone, especially our friends that might be either in or adjacent or interested in going to Europe, to please consider submitting abstracts to the Open Source Summit in Europe. We have the North America Summit going on in June, and this is kind of the sister brother offering of that. Please consider submitting abstracts. It's a great way to engage with the community, and I'm sure they'll actually have some events tailored towards the foundation, kind of like how they're doing in Texas, where we're having an whole OpenSSF day. We're talking about the different work streams and kind of sharing amongst the groups.
Do you happen to know the cutoff date for submissions off the top of your?
May 30th.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you, Vicki.
You bet.
And it's going to be in beautiful Dublin, Ireland, which I already get to go to this year. So I don't know if I'll get to go twice. We'll see. I would like to table the conversation on the charter. We've had a lot of talks at the TAC level about it, and I think we're close to having a more unified approach. And really the big sticking point is the TSE wording about how things are approved at the working group level. So if anyone has an objection, let me know. Otherwise, please continue to provide your feedback in that issue. And I'll report back from what the TAC has to say once they're done TACifying it.
I want to thank Anne for all of her really great suggestions so far. I saw those all coming in. So yay, Anne. Wait, are we recording this?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to
Yes,
make sure, credit to Anne gets on record.
You can go to the comfort of your living room in just 2 days and watch that over and over and over again on YouTube. My kids roll their eyes whenever I scroll by on my little YouTube list and my face shows up going, ah! They go, "Ugh, Dad." All right. If you have any other opens, please add them. Right now, I would like to yield the floor to Luigi to talk about security insights.
Cool, I can start. Perfect, thank you. Yes, in the last month, in our working group, we have decided to start this project to add a YAML file that is something that is both machine readable and human readable. This file that should be a standard that contains some information, especially the minimum requirement are the owner contact for a open source project, and some information about how to report a vulnerability to an open source project. In particular, because this standard will be transversal and generic, so it doesn't depend by the platform like GitHub or GitLab or something similar. And we know that some projects have the security MD, other have a link in the website, other have a different approach to report security issue. So this YAML file would like to give information useful for both for the researcher, for the developers, and also for the maintainer to give more information and contact to the community. And there is an important part related to the vulnerability reporting, and I think that is important, or it can be related to your topic, to this working group. So I have added some properties in the big property vulnerability reporting, where there are security contact linked to the security policy, if there is a bug bounty, if the project pays for vulnerabilities, how or where reporting vulnerabilities, and which kind of vulnerabilities a particular project can accept. I mean, you can accept everything, but maybe you want to focalize or you want to prioritize some report instead of the one. And I would like just your feedback about this. I can share the screen, or you can find it in the link, but maybe it is better if I share the screen. Wait a second. You can see that this file is this is the schema of the YAML file. Of sure, there are the example in the repo, but the vulnerability reporting contains some voice, like if the maintainers accept security report or not, if there is a bug bounty, a link to the bug bounty, contact, email contact, link to the security policy. Maybe if you have a PGP public key, you can add it, and a list of in scope and out of scope. This is a collection of link information. So technically, this is not a security policy. This is just a file that scanner and people can read quickly, like the security.txt, to find the information that they are looking for. At the same time, for example, I have some doubts. People, especially developer, ask a easy way to communicate with the security researcher what are the vulnerabilities that they want to receive. But at the moment, I haven't found a good taxonomy. So I've used the OWASP top 10. That is a standard, but at the same time is too poor probably. And it is, I want just to present to this working group to receive feedback, to give visibility to this project, because I think it will be a sort of standard. It would be a standard. So it is important that we are aligned, especially on the fourth version, because yes, we can improve it, but at the same time, it is important to have a good alignment before the launching. And that is, so I don't know if you have any feedback for me. I don't know if you can suggest me a better taxonomy for the in scope and out of scope. It's not easy to define what is in scope and out of scope. I know. I have tried to find something that is a sort of metric, and OWASP top 10 is very used, but I have added also the other voice. So, and it doesn't. I mean, I think that researchers should read also the security policy. There is the link in the schema to add the security policy. So it's not just something that you can use without reading the security.md or the security page, but it is something that scanner can collect. For example, you can create database if projects start to use it. So the goal is to improve the visibility and give a sort of security.txt that is a real standard for every project. And it doesn't depend by the platform like GitHub that offer you to add the security policy, but it is a GitHub feature that maybe other tool or just independent repository don't have. So that is. You can do question. I mean, this was the top. I would like to receive feedback about this part, because I think that maybe there are standards that I don't know, or you are working on a new standard or best practice that I don't know, and I would like to implement them.
So before I jump in, does anyone else have any thoughts? Vicky.
I have a thought, but I also just took a bite of toast.
Oh, I can start if you'd like to chew.
Please do.
So this would be the fourth standard I've seen around this particular set of information.
Yes.
I hesitate with you calling it a standard because what standards body or organization is backing it. So what steps have you taken to try to integrate with security.txt, firsts, little scorecard idea, our proposal around everyone having a security MD file at part of the repo? So what efforts, how would this link up with those assorted efforts?
It is a good question, and I have prepared the presentation for the CFNC group. I don't remember the name now at the moment, sorry. And because these are common questions. So the reason why we need this is because we have a lot of standards that are different. And we have seen, for example, using the scorecard, that the Apache Foundation that have good standard, but just for their organization, that have tweeted about this problem. So the security scorecard scanned the Apache repo, didn't found the file in the place that the scorecard suppose there are this file, and start to give a bad score to the Apache Foundation project, but they have the policy just in different place. So this file would like to solve this problem, because we want to offer a standard for repo that are independent by the platform, so GitHub and similar, that you don't need to force you to move your documentation, because you just need to add a link in the YAML. So you have the security policy in your website. You don't need to rewrite the security MD in every repo that you have. You just need to add a link to this file that can be the same or very similar for every project that you have, if you are an organization or a foundation. If you have just a single big open source project, you can just create and follow this. And there are two risks. The first one is another standard that we add, and we continue to add standards. So this is a problem, and we need to try to avoid this this scenario. And I suggest two things. I think that OpenSSF is in a good position. We have a lot of big companies that work or contribute directly to OpenSSF. We have the scorecard that is very popular, and we have some open source projects in our foundation, of course, and there are a lot of open source projects that follow this project. So one suggestion is to coordinate internally and with the Alpha Omega project that have a big list of big open source projects that are in touch with OpenSSF. So the plan is to coordinate our effort to implement this file, especially for Alpha projects or important open source project, the OpenSSF repo, just like the scorecard. And if we are able to convince also important open source projects by Google, Microsoft, and other company that are involved in OpenSSF, because in this way, if we have a big project that start to use it, other projects should follow us. And if we can have any, of course, a good, yes, it's not so easy, you are right, but there are other 2 points. Also, security.txt is not implemented in every website, but there is an official RFC. It is a sort of standard for security people, and it requires time. But now we have scanners that try to look for that file, and people are yeah, if a person knows this file, usually they try to add it, usually not everyone, but more you if you are bigger, if you have an important website, you try to add this to be compliant or to follow a best practice that is easy, but at the same time have a big impact. So the risk about missing or poor adoption, it is real. But at the same time, I think that OpenSSF is in the right position, because at the moment we have not enough information about open source project, because every open source project can be in different platforms. So you need to have different API and different logic for every platform. Every project add file in a different way. So we have some projects that have the security MD, other projects that have a link to the website, other projects that have just a page in a repo in the organization. So and it is difficult to collect information. With this file, we can create a standard to collect information and create database. And it is also human readable, so it is easy for a single person to read it. The most important part is coordinate people before the launch. So this means that OpenSSF should communicate. At the moment, in my task, I can show you, I think, wait, I don't know if I need to interrupt that. Okay. You can see Slack. Nope. Yes. Yes. Perfect. Okay. Here there are some action items. You can find this also in the meeting notes from my working group. So identify security threats. There is invited Mark Cox to this channel to present the project. He worked with the with the Apache Foundation and involve Alpha Omega. So I am jumping in a different meeting now in a different working group to explain this project. So we need to coordinate with the security scorecard to be sure that the security scorecard try to evaluate this file. Maybe not every voice, but the important voice. communicate with the Alpha Omega, so maybe we can convince people from important project to add this to a big open source project. Then there is also the new dashboard that we have deprecated the metric dashboard, but we are working on a new dashboard, and probably the dashboard can collect information directly from this file if we implement it. It should be a standard, so I know that it will require time. It's not just launch it and we have done. It is launch it, talk to conference, present to people, open PR in the open source project. But this is all risks that I have considered already. And the reason why I think that OpenSSF is the right place is because we can contact a lot of people quickly and easily, more or less, and to present our project. And in addition, this Friday I have a meeting with Red Hat people, for example, for the same reason. I want to convince Red Hat to adopt the standard. So if we start in this way, probably if there are enough stakeholder or popular project that follow us, it doesn't mean that every project follows this standard, of course, but if you start to become important in the open source community, maybe someone can suggest you to add this file. I know it's required time, it's not easy, it can fail. I have considered this. It is in the failure risk. I mean, I have calculated this, but if we want to reduce the likelihood of a failure, I need to communicate with everyone and try to convince people. I don't know if I have answered to your question.
Yes. Anne, I saw your hand up next, and then if Vicky has an additional question, she'll go afterwards.
Oh, I think Vicky was first.
Yeah, my hand is still up from toast time. Sorry.
Oh, go for it. I'm sorry then.
No, that's okay. No problem. So I'm just going to push more communication onto your stack there, Luigi. One of the things that OpenSSF is going to be looking at, or potentially looking at in the coming years, is helping to promote the use of SBOMs. And at the moment, it looks like they're trending towards, while being inclusive of all SBOM formats, they're trending towards SPDX, in particular formatted SBOMs. And so SPDX is currently working on version 3.0 of its standard, and this is an ISO standard, so it actually is standardized. So they're working on 3.0, and 3.0 includes various profiles, including a security profile, which I believe will include a fair bit of the information here. It could be that there's a good integration point for the generation of SBOMs. If a project includes this YAML file, perhaps that can be used to generate an SPDX 3.0 compliant SBOM. So I encourage you to show up to the SPDX community. They have several communities that are working on this right now. There is specifically one called Defects, which is about essentially vulnerability disclosures, but in SPDX. There's also the technical working group community. We don't call them working groups in SPDX, but there's the technical community, and the technical community is working on the specification. And so that would be very helpful for your group here. There's also another group that just started that is Canonicalization. And the Canonicalization group is coming up with a way to essentially translate between SPDX and other SBOM formats and canonicalize these to make sure that they can translate across and can kind of be moderately standardized. So those three, I think, could be very helpful for you and this project to engage with, to get additional adoption and also feedback on this thing, because I know there's been a great deal of thought happening all over the place actually on this topic. But in SPDX, they've got people from MITRE, they've got people from NIST, they've got people who really do a lot of work around this, who could be very helpful to provide feedback on all the work that you all have done. There you go.
Okay, if you can send me on Slack links so I can start to contact them, it will be great. So thank you for this point, because I know that there are a lot of people that have tried to standardize this kind of information in a file, in something similar, and people have already tried. So I consider that people have already tried to add a sort of standard, but for some reason, not every open source projects or organization follow their own approach. So the point is to try to create a real communication standard with people. And one important point, in my opinion, is to maintain it easy. So usually ISO procedure or standard, especially company standard or industrial standard, are not so easy for open source that are popular but maintained just by people. So I have tried to adopt the same approach of security.txt, a file that is easy, and so people can implement easily also for big projects that are just open source projects that have no company, no particular sponsor, but they are very popular. So, but it is important that I can be aligned with a lot of people, because I think this is one of the most important things. At the same time, I am jumping in OpenSSF to convince people to adopt it. For example, to convince Scorecard team to add it to the report and start to try to find it in the future in other repo. And also for the metric and project, or metric dashboard project and similar project that we have in OpenSSF. But yes, please, if you can share the link with this community, it is important, because I am already jumping to different security community or projects to say hey, we have this project, maybe we can align it. I have received a request about this bomb, and technically this project was born also for this reason. It is probably not still, I don't know how to define this, but it's not total complete or 100% good or something similar, because it is the first version, and at the moment I would prefer to maintain it easy for everyone, because in this way there is no friction to fill out it and add to the repo. At the same time, it cannot be too easy, because otherwise there is any value in something that don't give you more information or enough information. So I am trying to define also a good balance between these two things. So enough information and not too difficult for people. And that is. Thank you for your feedback. And if you share, there is a chat there is a link in the chat. Perfect. Okay, and I can stop to share also. And Anne Bertuccio, sorry, the pronunciation probably is wrong.
No, that's correct. No, I was just going to ask more about, you're saying that a big goal is that things are machine readable, which implies that there is going to be another platform or abstraction. I would spend some time thinking about who that user is and why they need that abstraction, what they're getting out of it. I think actually the folks Vicky and Krob were pointing to would have some really good insight. It's sort of like solving a problem by adding another layer, and sometimes there's good reason to do that, but you really, really want to make sure that that's going to lead things in a productive place, not just accidentally remove communication directly to projects.
Yes, I mean, the YAML file seems to be a good balance between human and machine, because it is easy. You can write quite easily a YAML file manually, and you can read it if you are a human. At the same time, a scanner can collect information. At the moment, it is not so easy to create security dashboards that are not based on API service. So we can collect the number of stars for a repo, or we can collect the number of fork, but we cannot collect some information related to link for the policy, link for the contribution, or in scope and out of scope for vulnerability report, security contact, or link to the pen testing, because maybe the link to the pen test report for an open source project is in the website and not in the repo. That is quite common. This file can, if of course there is enough adoption by the open source community, can help scanner to start to create real database that can help also people to compare projects, understand where are the information, find them easily, and it can help a company with the compliance for sure, but it can help also developer to evaluate the project. For example, if I know that an open source project that I am using have had a penetration test by a third-party company, I can read the penetration test. I can find it easily because it is on the dashboard. I just click a link without do crazy stuff to find it. It is better also for people. So from my perspective, the machine format is to start to collect database, collect information, and then also analyze them. Because in this way, we can also know if people, for example, this standard don't say that you need to add the security policy in the repo or in your website. And we can start, for example, to analyze where people add their security policy in a custom link or in a file in the repo. And in this way, also, we can try to define all the standard according to the numbers that we have. Of course, it is not a project that requires 2 months and we have done. It requires a lot of time because it won't be another layer for sure, and also a standard. So I am quite sure that if the RFC for security.txt require 5 years, I don't think that this project can be done in less time. So from that perspective, I don't expect a good result in a short time. It is a marathon, in my opinion. But if there is OpenSSF, if there are a lot of big open source projects involved, if new open source projects follow this approach, and if companies start to follow this, if scanners start to look for this file, I think that we can start to have a good database about open source projects, not just on GitHub, not just related to GitLab, also open source projects that are just mirrored on GitHub, but just for visibility, they have the real repo on their own infrastructure, for example. So this file can be a standard also for this reason. And on the long term, if we don't fail, I mean, we as community, we don't fail again to define a new standard that just failed because people don't follow it, it can bring value, but not in the short term.
So anyone else within the group? Vicky, do you have another question?
No, I just wanted to let Luigi know that I dropped a bunch of links into the working group, his working group Slack channel for you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else on the call have comments or thoughts? Do we feel this is something we want to embrace and partner, or do we have any additional feedback for Luigi?
Hello, this is Lucas speaking. Good morning to everybody. I wonder about the intersection of this with the well-known URI approach. I have pasted in a link in the chat.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, because I think that I have understood, but now that I want to be sure that I ever.
There is a common technique for publishing documents that need to be widely available, and it uses the .well-known path under a domain, basically at the root level. That's not exactly the same as what you're doing here, which is inside of a repo, but I think that it's kind of very, very similar, and probably would benefit from looking for commonalities that it could share.
Yes, this is an important question, in my opinion. At the moment, in my opinion, we have this problem with the repo, with the open source project, because, for example, there are a lot of standard, for example, but stupid, for example, some people put the documentation in the doc folder, other in the docs folder. So if I need to try to find a standard where put this file, probably I say just the main repo folder, because in this way I don't need to define a new standard where add a new standard. And every project have a repo in their own infrastructure on GitHub or where they want, but if you have an open source project, you need to have a repo. So the main folder of the repo exists for sure. A well-known URI cannot exist if you don't have a website. So we need to convince people to add this to a new folder or standard to the repo. If we just ask two people to add this file in the main folder, it can be easily found by people. So you don't need to be crazy to find it. Every repo have a main folder, and at the moment, this is a solution I have in my mind, because a well-known directory is good, but it is not used in the open source repo project that I have seen, not so much. And this is the main reason why I have decided to not adopt a similar approach, but just to propose to add this in the main folder of the repo.
Thank you.
What other thoughts or comments do we have for Luigi? Okay, he provided links to his Slack channel. So if you have comments, please provide those directly there. Luigi, I'll point you to our two resources. We have the CVD guide for open source maintainers, and that might be a great place for you to review and think about how your project might be integrated into that. And then we are, right after this, going to be talking about the CVD guide for security researchers, which again would be another place you would want to think about how your efforts integrate with.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes, sure. And thank you for the feedback. They are great. And especially because at the moment, my main problem probably is the communication, because a standard can be improved and people can just open PR, but convince people to adopt a new standard is probably the most point of failure of this project. So thank you for all the good link. And I suppose there is a way to download the Zoom chat. Yes, there is. Okay. And okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Luigi. Are there any other opens we want to talk about today, or do we want to jump into our CVD guide? I want to look at the guide. Great. I posted a link in the Zoom chat.
Vicky, your hand's still up if it's not supposed to be. Just a friendly.
It's not supposed to be. I love your hat.
Thank you.
It's a phenomenal tube.
I don't have my Doctor Who hat on though. Should grab that. I'll be right back.
So I want to thank everyone that spent some time over the last few weeks pecking away at the document. I apologize. I've been distracted by other tasks. So let us jump in now and kind of look at, ooh, nice. +1 on the hat. Let us jump into the CVD guide for finders, and let's start to discuss. As I have time, I'll continue to provide suggested feedback, and I would encourage everyone to do so. But what do we think about the state of the guide as it sits right now?
Give you some insights. We definitely weren't done. I think that I was working on it with, oh my God, your name escapes me. Please.
Madison?
Madison, thank you. Sorry. I'm recovering from a cold. So we weren't done. I think that last we spoke, we were both like, our brains are fried and we're done for the day. But we got some stuff in here that was, some stuff in here. There was some discussion of like various different topics, including like, hey, like, is it okay that we are being like, we're not necessarily encouraging full disclosure, but making sure that people are aware of that as a mechanism for handling vulnerabilities if all else fails, and like just kind of communicating what full disclosure looks like and why it's important, and why disclosure in general is important. I know that's a potentially contentious topic, but I think it's important to put in there.
Certainly is an option, yes.
Yeah, I think the way that we have it written is like when literally all else fails. So like, this is an option, but please try all of these other things first. But yeah, it is by no means done. But we got at least some bones in there, but plan on still working on it.
Do we talk about organizations like CERT-CC before you go to the full nuclear option of full disclosure? Is that in the list yet?
It's not in the list yet. I do question the value of doing so when if the maintainer is very like staunch that they're not going to fix it, or like that, whatever else. Also, CERT doesn't want to take, like, CERT is good for multi-vendor stuff. So if it's single vendor, they don't necessarily really want to get involved because they only have so many resources, right? That's kind of what you said, Madison.
Yes.
I'll chime in a little bit, being at CERT-CC.
Thank you.
We do take like lots of single vendor cases. The truth is most cases that come in aren't multi-vendor. So when they do come in, we definitely take them. But a lot of our cases are single vendor. And we have also had cases where reporters come to us saying, we can't work within the bug bounty confines of company X, company Y, company Z. So can you help us? And we try, right? So, and we've had some success doing things like that as somewhat of a workaround if there's an issue of that sort. So I'm not going to say like do or don't come here, but I would say also maybe present it as an option, I guess, is I guess all I'd suggest.
Yeah, sort of the way that I've been thinking about this document is that we can just present all of the options for reporters so they're aware just of everything. I think that would be the most useful for reporters. So just including everything so they're aware. So I think adding this is totally fine. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Is there, has there been any work on the bug bounty HackerOne VDP side of the story? Has there been any progress in that part of the document?
Yeah, this is Kayla. Crystal and I posted, we were working on it the last 2 weeks. Yeah, so we posted our bit down at the bottom. So I definitely think looking through what we have today that we're going to need to restructure and reorganize. It's a bit repetitive because we were kind of working in a silo. I think especially some of the language, we're using vulnerability disclosure policy / program a lot. And I'm perfectly happy changing that to CVD if we wanted to say that, because VDP is already included as another name. And so it's a little repetitive based on like that section compared to what's already there. So I'm totally good with us like restructuring it, moving it higher up, maybe just taking the bug bounty parts and anything that might be unique about the VDP part. But yeah, it's in there.
The term VDP is valid as a vulnerability disclosure program. It's going to refer mainly to vendors. A project might not have that, but a vendor like Red Hat or SUSE does. So I think it's valuable to keep it. But
I think that
the overarching theme.
One of the things that I've struggled with
bug bounty or VDP or implementations of something like trying to do that.
Right. Regardless of it being a VDP or a bug bounty program, one of the things that this sort of larger issues that I've seen with, as soon as you end up with a vendor under Black Hat, or sorry, wow, my brain, I'm still under HackerOne or BugCrowd, is that most of those organizations and companies, even if you're like dealing with a VDP, will have a non-disclosure policy on their VDP. And like, I know that that's not like, I've spoken to Alex Rice and I've spoken to Keisha John Ellis, and they're both like, well, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And I'm like, well, it doesn't really matter the way it's supposed to be. It's the way it actually is. And so I don't know if like the differentiation between VDP and bug bounty program really matters more. I think that it doesn't matter as much as the call out specifically of ensuring that when you're disclosing a vulnerability in an open source piece of software, that you are not agreeing to an NDA.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that. And I certainly would love the thoughts of the group here. So the position that Crystal and I took while writing this is that this is a document written for a community interacting with the open source community. So a community interacting with a community. And we took the approach that first off, a VDP should not include a non-disclosure clause. So we did take that stance, and we have that in the document.
This is for the reporter side, not for the disclosure side, or not for the people that are
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah. So their awareness, right? So kind of like what you guys were saying earlier, we want the reporter to be aware that there should not be a non-disclosure
Okay.
clause in a VDP.
Right.
In the bug bounty section, and this is something I'd love to talk about really, is the aspect of we still kind of had this perspective of it's open source. There shouldn't be a non-disclosure clause, even for a bug bounty program.
Mhm.
But obviously then we start talking about, there are vendors who support open source software, so it can get more complicated. So the way we put it in the language, for totally up for debate, right? But the way we included it as a call out for this awareness of non-disclosure clause or agreements or any of those topics, is that if you are reporting a vulnerability on a piece of open source software that might belong to or be supported by I don't know if private's the right word, but commercial entity, there might be more strict disclosure guidelines or disclosure process. And just for the awareness, for them to be aware of that. But I think that is kind of a topic that is, I don't know if we have an opinion of that on that as a group. Like, is there a place for non-disclosure clause within the world of open source?
My personal perspective is that there isn't, but it exists anyways, and so you have to deal with it, right? Like you have to be clear. You have to sorry, I jumped the line.
No. Before I jump to Anne, Kayla and Crystal, are you two plugged into the bug bounty community of interest? That's another community effort.
We are not, but I do know people who are on the community of interest. I think they do some amazing work.
If
I
you're
think there's some on
interested
the call,
in joining
correct?
or participating or learning,
Yeah.
I'll be glad to make some connections. I get to help write nonsense for them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great. Love
I
that.
love that.
Awesome. I will if your emails are on here, Zoom me your emails.
yeah.
And I'll make some connections.
Okay.
Anne, I'm sorry I jumped ahead of you.
No, I'll fine. I guess maybe it's important to distinguish open source projects that use embargoes, NDAs, and where if an open source project has engaged a bug bounty vendor, what that means for the embargo that they may or may not have. We should probably also separately as this group have a discussion about open source projects using embargoes, because that gets really sticky. And I know, kind of the position we took when we were writing Google's guide was that it is so rare that I think there's a tendency to treat it as a default. And we took the position that the project that needs that is incredibly rare. Your default should be that you do not need an embargo. We were trying to force the conversation the other way around. So I'm curious actually for the bug bounty crew, how do things work of say, my open source project has an existing embargo program, or that's something we use, and then I go sign up for HackerOne, a bug crowd. What does that workflow look like?
Yeah, happy to take that one. I don't ever see it in open source. I'm sure that it exists somewhere, but I haven't seen it. So that's why I was hesitant to make a huge section in there. I do see it in commercial projects, but in open source, like I couldn't think of a single example, to be honest. So that was kind of why we didn't make it a large section.
Yeah, and also I'll add with the internet bug bounty, like when I'm working with open source projects to reward vulnerabilities discovered, I specifically included any of that in the policy that we have and any of the work we have there, that there is no reward available until the vulnerability has been disclosed in the way that the project desires. So we work with some projects who have very, very detailed disclosure, a very detailed disclosure process that does include embargo, and it does have a whole list of like, this is the first wave of who gets notified, this is the second wave, and they're very specific about at what stage the researcher could be rewarded through the bug bounty program. And so just one of the things that we operate, that the way that we operate for IBB is that we respect the wishes of the project. But I don't have any examples from any of the IBB projects or the projects enrolled in IBB that have an NDA looped in that I know of, because we publicly disclose everything rewarded through IBB. So one way or another.
Jonathan.
I rail against this a bit. It sounds like that model is paying researchers for their silence up to a certain point. Like you're basically like you're creating a financial incentive to keep the researcher from disclosing, which I really struggle with in the bug bounty space, because that's where a lot of, that seems like the model the bug bounty like ecosystem has, is this goal of paying researchers to not air companies' dirty laundry, right? And the downside of that is that it disincentivizes disclosure of vulnerabilities that are important in critical bits of software. And so that's why I've kind of, whenever I encounter that, I basically say, no, I'm not going to agree to your terms in that area. But so what are is there, for these organizations that have these embargoes, are their timelines reasonable? Like, do they usually conform to a 90-day embargo timeline, or are they like, well, we'll get to it when we get to it, or like whenever we get to this step, then you can disclose, and that step may be reached in 6 months?
Wanted to clarify something. Kayla, you're saying as part of IBB that the report must be disclosed publicly before it can be awarded. So that's sort of like intrinsically part of it, that it is disclosed. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think maybe there was a misunderstanding there. Like,
I think there's a timeline. There's definitely a timeline. So like I think Zen project is one of our, or hypervisors, Zen hypervisors, one of our bigger ones that has a very, very descriptive process, publicly available. Anyone can follow along with the stages. So they have a timeline involved. We obviously don't get involved with their vulnerability reception, the handling of their vulnerabilities. We let that to them. So I'm not sure what their full timeline is from a reporting to the end disclosure. But I would say when working with the other groups that I work with for open source, it's a longer timeline from initially right. It's open source. It's the community. It's a longer timeline. But as far as anyone specifically like choosing to not disclose something, it's just not something I see with the open source projects I work with. But again, also I am not the voice of I am not the official authority here. This is just talking about my experience working with open source projects and the internet bug bounty and the content that I've seen. And that was one of the things that Crystal and I kept restating as we were writing this, is the audience of this guide is finders who have discovered vulnerabilities within open source projects, open source software, who were engaging with open source maintainers. And like Crystal said, that's why we didn't want to go into a big topic of a lot about NDAs, because I guess just the perspective is that it shouldn't be an emphasis in the world of open source. It doesn't really jive with the open source theme.
Maybe would it help? I have two stories. Can I share two stories that would help kind of give some context on this?
If they're open source.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have no say here.
Well, yeah. So the first vulnerability was in a project that was owned by hotels.com, which is owned by Expedia. And I emailed Expedia about the vulnerability and reported it to them. And of course, you get an automated email back saying, hey, by the way, thank you for sending us this email. But we didn't actually see your email. You have to open your report in this private vulnerability disclosure program under the Expedia group bug bounty program on HackerOne or whatever, right? And so then you go to that and you go and see the form that you're filling out. And only when you hit the submit button with all the information, do you then get to see the page of the VDP. And oh, by the way, the VDP has a non-disclosure policy on it. It's like, well, I just disclosed to a program with a policy that I didn't even read before I disclosed the vulnerability, right? Like, and so I told them like pretty flat outright as soon as I read that, I'm not agreeing to your NDA, like that, and they were okay with it, but I was very upset that I had ended up like being cornswaddled into an NDA. And I think that they have since updated their policy, but that was like, I would just prefer to stick to email. One of the things that Tavis Ormandy has said on Twitter previously is that like, I'm not going to, I won't disclose via bug bunny programs or HackerOne or something like that. He basically says, if there's not an email, like get me an email to somebody. The other story that I have is for vulnerabilities that I found in Netflix's software. And Netflix is a very public bug bounty program, but they also have NDAs on their policy. And I basically opened a ticket beforehand saying, hey, I have a vulnerability in some of your open source software. Can I get approval to disclose it to you guys and not be under these terms? And then subsequently had to again, then they said, yes, open another ticket with the vulnerability details and it'll be bound by this agreement that we've made beforehand, right? There's a lot of extra effort and time and energy that has to go into like getting the agreement that it's not going to be bound. You can't just get to the disclosure of the vulnerability state. You have to go through I also have to fight you about the policy you have beforehand before I can even give you the information about the vulnerability. And that's, I don't have a good solution to that, but I think that the making people aware and telling them, hey, you should be aware of what you're agreeing to when you're like, so that you are making an informed decision in that department should be part of this document. And I don't know how to tell that story well. And I don't know how to tell that story that doesn't like scare people away or doesn't like make this document like super long. But I do think that's an important part of the story that needs to get told, that needs to get communicated to people and warn them about that they should be doing that sort of due diligence ahead of time.
So there's a nuance there, Jonathan, with your stories. You're reporting to commercial entities that supply these open source packages. And in the nomenclature of our personas, those would be maintainers / suppliers. And that's a little bit different focus or instruction than what we're hoping for here. And again,
not quite.
Well,
sorry, just
there
can
are
you
commercial
elaborate upon what you
there,
think
and
is
it's different than two college kids that pushed out something into the world.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that because they are a commercial entity that you're disclosing to, that's the difference. Not that the software they're producing is any different from what the college students are producing. It's
Correct.
Because it's owned by a larger entity that there's a difference there.
Or predominantly supported by it. Again, there's just it's a nuance, and I think it's possibly something we address in the future, like a CVD guide for open source suppliers. Here's some good practices we should advocate for, and no NDAs, or being upfront with what your policy is, not at the end of it. So we can provide some instruction there, but it's a slightly different target audience. And we're trying to help. The intention here would be there's a finder that discovers a vulnerability and they are having a opportunity reporting it. And maybe they can't find a contact. Maybe they do get stonewalled. Maybe it's an abandoned project. So hopefully this guide can help provide the researcher means to help them with their goal of helping the project be better, helping the software be better.
I don't think there's any. I mean, assuming the software is still open source, right? I mean, in both cases, these were pieces of open source software that were shipped to end users that were not directly, like they were not customers of Netflix, right? This is software that Netflix is publishing because it's a utility thing that they've written that other people can consume, right? And regardless of who owns the software, you found a vulnerability in an open source piece of software. So I don't necessarily know that.
If Netflix is the only maintainer, though, Jonathan, you are trying to influence them to fix the problem. If there are no non-employee contributors, it's more challenging. And I agree, that's definitely a situation that a researcher is going to bump into. I don't know that that's primarily what we want to focus on today.
And I think it's
Please do.
also worth, these larger institutions, entities may have just painted all their vulnerabilities with the same process brush.
Yes.
Right? Be it internal and external. And that is, I think, Krog, you had a very good idea of providing guidance to them of separating these things. I actually, just before this, got off of a call with a bunch of financial services groups talking about their policies around open source and retention and reporting and all that sort of stuff. And they specifically have to carve out in their policies, their existing policies. Here's how you can communicate around open source. Here's how you can do our retention policies with open source, but they have existing policies they have to carve out. It sounds like this might be something we need to advise entities on in the future for a thing. And so we're making more work for ourselves, but that's okay. That's good, because
That's good
it
work.
will make less work for ourselves in the long run. I think it's a great idea.
And we already provided instruction, and we can update that instruction for maintainers. Maybe the maintainers need to think more about what their long-term support is, what they will and won't do around these types of reports. So we can try to influence on both ends, so that when researchers do discover something, it's a more frictionless experience.
Mm.
But open source projects should have the expectations documented of when a flaw is found, what they're going to do with it, and how they will react as it's handled.
Excuse me.
All right. I want to thank everybody that spent some time over the last few weeks on this document. Madison, Kayla, Jonathan, and Crystal, and everybody else. Please continue to contribute your thoughts, and we will meet again in a few weeks to talk some more about this. I'm really excited about our progress. Thank you, everybody. Great work and good conversation
you.
today.
Uh,
Cheers.
Thank you.
Love the hat,
Bye.
Jonathan.
May the 4th be with you.
And Crow.
I love the necktie or the scarf.
It's awesome.
It's massive.
Yeah,
Baker
there
was
you
one of my
go.
favorites.
I think it's 6.5 feet long.
Nice.
We should all bring our hats to the Open Source Security Foundation or the Linux, Austin, Texas. There we go.
I'm bringing a
I-
hat.
All
I
right.
won't be there.
All right.